Still alive?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. Today is Tuesday, June 20th, 2023. And this is the Cottonwood Heights City Council work session. First item on our agenda today is going to be a review of our business meeting agenda. So, yeah, I hope we've communicated this to Matt. So we'll have our pledge of allegiance and we'll have our city council committee reports tonight. So hopefully that's not completely excited by that. We'll have a citizen comment period. And then tonight we have a public comment period on a zoning text amendment. I'm not going to talk about that now. We'll have that's under a staff report. We'll have Mike Johnson introduce that to us in a bit here. We have a busy legislative action item calendar tonight, so we'll begin tonight with consideration of ordinance 396, adopting an amended budget for the July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023 budget. So Scott, do we want to talk about that now, or do you want to talk about that as well in the staff report now? Do you want to talk about
actually it'll be in the staff report here
okay
in a few minutes, if that's okay.
Okay, yep.
Either one.
So we'll do the same thing on item 6.2, consideration of ordinance 397, approving a final budget for our July 1, 2023 through June 30th, 2024 budget year. And that we'll come back to Scott here in just a minute when we get to our staff reports. Item 6.3 is a consideration of resolution 2023-33, approving development exceptions for realty at 3457 East Magic View Drive. And do we have Mike online with us?
Yeah, I'm here, Mayor.
Community and Economic Development Director Mike Johnson on the line with us. And do you want to address this at all real quick, Mike?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, go over any information you'd like to. Again, I know last time you had asked for us to do a little research on where the two standards that they're requesting exception came from. So I've got that here, and I can share that quickly. Just get to the slide. So I will just quickly go back to the exception and the two exceptions they're requesting. One is for the setback when adjacent to a private street. The city ordinance requires 50 feet from the middle of any private roadway as a minimum setback, as opposed to the 25-foot property line setback that's typically found in the R18 zone. And then private street lot size, the minimum is a ½ acre regardless of underlying zoning. So there was some discussion on kind of wondering where these provisions came from originally. I don't have the greatest answers, but I have a little more information that I'm happy to share. We went back and found that Salt Lake County's development ordinance has the same exact exception language in it, which was originally codified in 1991. And then amended. We don't know exactly how it was amended, but an amendment was done in 2001, but nothing in the county ordinance has changed, at least in this particular county ordinance has changed since 2001. So that at least establishes that it's very likely we got this language directly from the county ordinance that was in place at the time, and similar language has been around since the early 90s. The 50-foot private roadway setback, I think we've kind of worked out the idea of where this comes from. Right now in that same ordinance, the current right-of-way size for a private road is 50 feet. It'd be 25 feet of asphalt, curb gutter, sidewalk kind of thing, and then room for park strip and sidewalk on both sides. And that's what our private roadway standard is. So if you take 50 feet from the middle of a compliant private roadway, then that's really going to take up half of that 50 feet is the right of way itself. So the middle of the road to the edge of the sidewalk, and then another 25 feet, which totals 50, is going to match the typical setback of a residential home. It's pretty common when a development is developed with a private street for the street to become part of the property. So they put the property lines right in the middle of the road instead of at the back of the sidewalk. So that's our best guess at where the 50-foot setback standard came from. Is it assumes on a new private roadway, the property line may be in the middle of the road. And instead of saying 25 feet from property lines, which would allow you to put a house right on the edge of the sidewalk, it just says 50 feet from the middle of the road. The particular roadway that they're requesting an exception from is not a compliant roadway. It doesn't really meet the private road standards, which is why they've requested the exception, because it's kind of an irregular situation. The half-acre lot size, I wish I could have found more. We don't have much on that. There's no clear evidence or background or good rationale for why it says in the code lots on a private road have to be half an acre. Some of the line of thinking may be that, again, sometimes the property line is in the middle of the roadway and they didn't want that acreage to be counted towards the minimum lot size. But half acre is pretty big, quite substantially bigger than like an 8,000 square foot lot. So I don't have a great answer on where that came from, other than my best line of thinking is it comes from the differences in property lines when you're developing on a private road versus a public road.
Yes.
Actually, Mike, that makes a lot of sense, because what you showed us, the property line was actually not down the middle of the road for this lot. It was along where we would normally expect the curb and gutter to be.
Right. Yep.
Because it looks like the people across the street / to east of most of the property are the ones who actually own that part of the road.
Yeah.
I think you're right. It usually kind of assumes that people own to the middle of the roadway. I know that was the case on Bengal for some of the people who've settled out here a long time ago. It may also be similar to the people that live down on Little Cottonwood Creek, where their property line goes to the middle of the creek. And so it does make a couple of exceptions. And the half acre probably is easily adjusted by making sure you exclude whatever part of a road is out of your lot size. That half acre is one way to do that, but it probably doesn't work for us here as a general rule as much anymore. So I don't know if that's another thing that we want them to take on, but maybe put it on the list for ways to fix this part.
Yeah.
Thing.
No, that's great feedback. I think a Title 14 update is in the works, kind of on the list. So certainly we would revisit these, these standards as well. Another thing to note is the private driveway that's there now is not a 50-foot. It doesn't have curb, gutter, sidewalk. It really is more of a driveway than a private road. So that's kind of working against the applicant in this case as well.
So Mike, give me a reminder of the requirement on the address change that would have to go along with this.
Yeah, so I'll just say on this screen here, because this little private driveway is Magic View Drive, and then the public street to the south that runs parallel is also Magic View Drive. All of these lots have been assigned addresses that work in numerical sequence right now, but there are no new address points to assign. They want to subdivide off kind of the southeast corner of this large lot that's outlined in yellow. There's not another address to fit in there that's in numerical order. And we had checked with the dispatch service and with our GIS specialist, and it's not good practice to assign a number out of order. It makes finding that property more difficult, and it's just not something we like to do for new development. So one of the requirements would be that they would actually rename this driveway here, this Magic View Drive, to a unique named road, and then the properties along that, I think there's 5 or 6, would be readdressed, and that would all happen as part of the subdivision plat process for this 1.27 acre property.
And do they have to get 100% sign off to do that?
There's a requirement for addressing. I think a certain number of owners along the road have to sign off on it. It's a Salt Lake County process. And the applicant is aware, that's just going to be a city requirement. And that was part of their rationale for The exception is it does increase the safety of emergency services finding the area by addressing. So they know it's a requirement. And we would kind of put the burden on them to go through that process, and the subdivision wouldn't be able to happen without them doing that and getting whatever level of approval or consent is required.
I have a question, if I may.
Yes.
Sure.
So why cannot this address be, okay, so the address is 2615. Why can't this new property be 2615 and a half? Like, why can't this be termed something other than a full digit? Is that a possibility, so that you don't have to rename the street and all the residents have to redo their addresses?
I don't know the technical answer, but I know that, you know, there is a system for addressing properties, whether they're on the north side of the road or the south, and whether it's an even number, an odd number, and how that sequencing works. And it's kind of dictated from Salt Lake County down to the local level. And the feedback I've been given from both the county and our GIS staff is there is not an address that can be assigned without assigning one that's out of order.
Because most addresses don't go, they're not numerical. I mean, they're not, you know, every single number isn't assigned. I just, does anybody understand
Well,
what
in
I'm
this case,
asking?
because you've got two, you have the people that are on Magic View Drive
Yes.
and people that are on Magic View Drive, and they probably assigned them all out. Because that's a lot more than 5 that you would get,
But isn't the idea that we need a new address for this one?
right?
So say it's
But if this one's 11, 13, 15, 17, and 19, there's no odd number that you can put
how
in.
about 18?
Well, that would be on the other side of Magic View Drive.
Because they assign them by different sides of the street,
North and east, even southwest.
But
even and odd.
But even with that, having two streets, even though one is more of a drive, I was just trying to find out. I'm guessing the ones that are on Magic View Drive are probably all dressed at this entry point rather than actually how far east they
That's a
are.
good question. Yeah, I don't know.
I just think that
That becomes an issue again for emergency services.
Well, so I'll add that we had a public hearing on this last meeting and nobody came to talk. So that actually
But have
lent some weight to me that the residents don't object.
the residents all received a letter?
They did.
This would
Yeah,
be
so-
conditional.
They each received a letter, every one of them?
So we had a public hearing with the planning commission and sent notices out to the residents. I think it was within 300 or 500 feet of the property. And then the property owner also sent a letter to the residents along Magic View Drive. We had several residents come to planning commission that live on that same shared street that expressed support for the applicant's request. There was one person concerned with the request who lived to the north, which is a different neighborhood that's down a steep hill and not really affected by the addressing portion of this.
So it's said in no uncertain terms in the letter, you will have to change your address. I just want to make sure
Well,
it's
so if
communicated.
we approve this, it would be conditional upon them agreeing to change their address, correct, Mike?
That's correct. The notice itself didn't say the addressing would need to change, but those that were in attendance that at the public meeting, it was part of the staff presentation and part of the applicant's request.
I mean, just empathizing with these neighbors, if I received a letter, I would want to do the neighborly thing and be supportive of somebody wanting to redevelop their land. So I don't think it's, I mean, I think it
But
needs to be
you're right, yeah.
graphically communicated that, you know, this proposition is that you will change your address. And it can't be just at a presentation held here in City Hall. I think every single resident that's going to have to change their address needs to be made aware. We're telling you, if this goes through, you'll be changing your address. I just think that needs to be really.
The replatting involves look, the plat, it's not just this one parcel, it's got 10 or 12 or 15 parcels, I'm assuming, is that correct?
The mechanism of the plat, I'm not sure off the top of my head, but It's been communicated. Again, it's not the city making them change their addressing. It's that if the applicant would like the subdivision to go through, the address change needs to happen for safety, emergency access reasons and having a clearer address. So that process will be looped into the subdivision portion of this. And if there are residents that would rather not change their address, they can say no. And you know, that again, like the mayor said, that's a condition of the final plat, that address change needs to happen.
So they, even though if we approved it, they could still stop it. from
Yeah, it may
going
not
forward.
happen if there's not enough.
Correct.
If they haven't done their due diligence and asked and communicated, and enough people are surprised and upset, then it's all for naught.
Right.
And we do have several roads similar to this. There's some off of Creek Road and some off of Fort Union, and you know, we do these address corrections separate from development. You know, maybe a handful of times a year, so that it's not unprecedented to go through and clean up addresses, and we have a process for how to do that and how to notify the people that you know, that petition has been made and go through that. So you know, it's not like we haven't done this before. There is a process for it that we would follow.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Appreciate all that. And like I said, we'll be voting on that here shortly tonight. So item 6.4, consideration of resolution 2023-34, approving entry into an interlocal agreement with various jurisdictions for grants under HUD programs. Mike, do you want to talk about that as well?
Yes, so this is what the county calls the Urban Counties Agreement. This is basically their community development block grant. When they get federal funding assistance opportunities through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, it's filtered down to the local level through the county, through the CDBG program, and there's a couple other programs. But via this agreement, residents from Cottonwood Heights can be eligible for these assistance programs. They typically have to do with housing costs for people that are in need of housing cost assistance or in certain socioeconomic categories that would qualify. So it's a great program to be able to offer residents. This is just renewal of the regular contract that we sign through Salt Lake County. We were given an opportunity, or we were asked if we wanted to opt out, I presume to do our own thing, but we've been participating in this program, I believe, since the city's been incorporated along with the other cities in Salt Lake County. So we're just recommending that we sign this and continue. And then that would lead into training and coordination between county staff and city staff on how to administer this at the local level.
Okay. Questions, comments? Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So before we move on to 6.5, I failed to mention that council member Holton is at a funeral. He had a close associate to pass away, and so the funeral's at 2. He was going to the cemetery. He will be here, he said, as soon as he could get there. I apologize that I didn't mention that at the beginning of the meeting. Okay, next item 6.5, consideration of resolution 2023-35, approving reappointments to the planning commission. So Tim, tell us about that.
Yeah, so this includes 2 members of the planning commission, Dan Mills, Lucy Anderson. They've been serving, they're willing to serve an additional term and they're eligible to do that. We're recommending approval. They're both from District 3, one an at-large and then one just a regular district, and so recommending approval.
Great.
Which district does Lucy
3.
reside in?
3.
So they're both in District 3.
Does that bring us to full complement, or we still have an opening?
We have an opening.
Still needs to be filled.
Yeah, I've had a lot of interest in that. In fact, even today I received more applications, so we have around 5 or 6 now that I've been interviewing for that position, and I will continue to do that until I interview all of them, and then hopefully have something to you in July.
Okay, thank you. Item 6.6, consideration of resolution 2023-36, approving reappointments to the Parks, Trails and Open Space Advisory Committee.
So this is a reappointment of a number of individuals for this, including Bruce Jorgensen, Paula McFarland, Mike Menson, Chris Owens, and Jennifer Cottom. Jennifer is filling a seat that the end of the term of the seat, and so you.
Yeah, that was like, what, 2 months ago?
You appointed, or she was appointed a couple of months ago, and so this is for another term. And so we're recommending approval of all of these individuals to continue to serve, appreciate their service.
Great. Questions, comments? And our last item for tonight, consideration of resolution 2023-37. Approving entry into an agreement for building services with Sunrise Engineering Inc. Now, this is the, is this the property management contract? No, this is not. Sorry. Mike, why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So Sunrise Engineering provides our building plan review and building inspection services. Basically, they act as a contracted building department for us for the building code side of permits. They have been our service provider since city incorporation, I believe. This is a proposed update of a 3-year contract. The actual contract language and fee schedule and rate structure and everything is unchanged from the 2020 contract, which is also unchanged from the 2017 contract. So there have been no price increases in this contract since 2017. And I think it's notable how the contract is set up in terms of how Sunrise is paid. They take a portion, basically they collect a portion of permit revenue that we collect in any given month, which means that there's no flat rate that we're paying. If building permit activity goes down, Sunrise's payment goes down. And if building activity is busy and there's a lot of permits issued, then their share of that would go up. I believe off the top of my head, they take about 35 to 38% of permit revenue per building permit issued. And then we pay that right out of that permit revenue that we collect, and then we keep the remainder. They provide their own equipment and vehicles and staffing and those kind of things. So it's a pretty economical contract for the city to be part of. And we've had a good relationship with Sunrise, so we're recommending a 3-year extension of that.
You, Mike, has there been any issues on timeliness of issuing permits at all?
No, in fact, probably for the last 2 years, since the state has gotten stricter about their permit review timelines, we are consistently probably a week ahead of the state mandated deadline. Sunrise is always very quick on their portion. We schedule inspections just the day before, and we don't have any issues with inspectors not showing up. So very, very few issues in my experience working with Sunrise.
Great. Other questions, comments?
So when we redid we did have like kind of a flat rate and then some extra thing before, but since we changed that, I think it's worked out really well.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Where are you at, by the way?
I'm at a lake house in North Carolina at my in-laws family reunion. So appreciate this. I haven't missed a council meeting in 2 years, and now I'm remote 2 in a row. So thanks for the patience.
Thanks for joining us and being committed. Appreciate that. Okay. And then the last item for tonight will be approval of the consent calendar, which is the city council work session, CRA business meeting, and city council business meetings on June 6th.
There was just a minor change that Paul made to one of my comments to clarify.
Yeah. From the CDRA, right? Yeah. Yep. Okay. Okay, we have a full staff report, items to discuss today. We'll start with item 3A, which is the final 2023-24 budget and final property tax rate discussion. So we'll have our administrative and fiscal services director, Scott Georges, lead us in that discussion.
So really quick, included in here, we'll also kind of review the budget adjustments for the current year budget. The items haven't changed since we initially reviewed these at the second meeting in June, or sorry, not June, May, when we first introduced this. Just really quick, $200,000 being transferred back to the general fund from the capital projects fund. This was the earnest money we used to tap into for the Hillside Plaza prior to getting bond funding for that. ZAP grant, recognizing that revenue and expense related with that grant. Police, some sale of cell phones to be used to offset other cell phone costs, 4,846. Overtime for the B Jackson Construction Company reimbursement of $650. Police asked state of Utah asset forfeiture grant of $3,000 on both revenue and expense. Police bulletproof vest grant, $838, both revenue and expense. Police DUI enforcement grant from the Utah State Division of Public Safety, two amounts there that total to $1,691, both revenue and expense. And then the sale of 4 public works light duty vehicles of $83,000, just recognizing that revenue. We still have one more that we're gonna sell, and I don't believe that's sold as of yet. So on that, it would be a net benefit to, it would reduce our net expenditures $173,000 and increase our revenues $209,000, a net benefit to the general fund of $283,000. Then the capital projects fund, utilizing $72,000 of fund balance in there to finish and close out the roundabout project that we had. The number 2 is some roundabout funding that is being provided from the Canyon School District of $14,920. And then this is the transfer back of that capital project money that we talked about to the general fund. And then in the CDRA fund, adding in both $150,000 of expense and revenue to cover different operating costs and revenues that we'll expect from the Hillside Plaza and took through the end of this month that we're on. And that's all of it. There's all stuff that we've gone over before. Any questions specific to this adjustment? Okay.
Me, nope, thanks.
So switching over then, and I printed this out, so maybe we can just hand these out to you all real quick. This is in your, well, it's not in your packet. I forwarded it yesterday because I didn't have some information before I went on vacation and had to finish that as we were going, as I got back. So I came in yesterday and sent this out to each of you. Wanted to make sure that you had the latest greatest copy in case you wanted to take any notes or anything like that on there. I've highlighted in yellow the items that have changed from our tentative budget, and so I'll mainly focus on those items. But if you do have any questions of anything, I'll go ahead and answer those. So the outline that we've got here, I'm going to move to the bottom of the first page where the first item that we have is we received our final new growth property tax number from the state tax commission. That was $39,626, a little lower than we had anticipated. We had put $50,000 in our guesstimation. And then as happens pretty much every year, as our property values go up, our tax rate declines. And so it goes from 1,442 down to the new year would be 1,422. And so that will be, and that's on a calendar year. So that's actually the year we're in right now, but it will affect our next budget year since that we will collect that in November. There's a nice screenshot of how it all looks, but you can see right down here in this orange box right here, that's where that 39,000, get out of there, 39,626 comes in. And this is where you can see the final certified tax rate in there. And if you want to look at a lot of details of how they come up with that, you can read through a bunch of numbers that are hard to understand and figure out where they all come from. But that's that's the state tax commission property tax website where all that stuff comes from.
Go to that website or get a magnifying glass.
Yeah, it's tough, and it's not very big on the website either. So, but digging into all the numbers, there's a lot that goes into it. So, moving down on the second page there, partway through, the telecom tax, we had initially included that in, but we have pulled that out for conversations that we had earlier. We had put in 300,000, but that's now in there at 0, so that's not included at this point in time. Other revenue changes, we added in the $250,000 of interest revenue. That's just the general fund portion here. that's in the general fund. And then we added in $11,000 for tree sales for part of the sustainability projects that we added in, and that will be, you'll see that an $11,000 expense that will be added in a little bit down below.
Let me go back to the telecom tax.
Yes,
When was that pulled out?
Our last meeting,
I think it was the last meeting.
yeah, the last meeting we talked about,
I know there was a reservation, but I didn't understand it was going.
we didn't have a majority to move forward with it. One of the things that we talked about is we don't have to renotice it or do another public hearing, so we can continue this as a topic in the next couple of months if we still want to consider it, but yeah, we didn't have a majority to move
I
forward.
remember that too.
I would suggest that we bring it up. September timeframe, so that if we want to implement a half year, that we have time, we can at least have the discussion.
Yeah. Yep.
Again,
So going down onto page 3, in the expenditure side of things. Well, maybe just really quick before I go to expenditure, just at the top of page 3. So our total revenues budgeted are just over 25 million, 25,303,000. And that is actually a decrease from our current year revenues because we have a $2 million grant in there that's non-recurring, the state and local fiscal recovery funds. But once you take that grant out, our actual increase is $1,350,000 from our original budget, or about a 5.6% net increase. So that's where our revenues ended up. On expenditures, the cost of living, the COLA is in there at 3.5%, or a $352,000 net impact for that. There was a slight change on the merit because of the compounding of interest as we do that. So since the COLA amount's a little bit lower, the merit is applied to a slightly lower amount, so on and so forth. So that dropped to maybe $2,000 or so from what we had in there before. Let's see, in the city attorney, that dropped to $8,000 from what we had in there at 15,000. And that's due to matching to the COLA that was implemented. That we had initially had 35,000 in to cover liability insurance increases, and that came back at 23,000. The community and economic development, this is the 11,000 for the community tree sale event. And that will be offset by the revenues that are come in from selling the trees. The fire increase, we had initially had $270,000 and it came in at $212,275. And then in transfers out of the general fund, we put in here a $30,000 transfer out for the Mount View Park pollinator planting expansion. This was a sustainability project that we added. And so when you look at the overall impacts in the general fund, it's a budgeted use of fund balance of $2,217,000. So our budgeted ending fund balance would be $5,880,000, which would be 23.2% of our revenues, and that's within our limits. Now, one note is that this does not include any anticipated underexpend. We typically are in the 800 to $1 million. 800,000 to $1 million of underexpend. So I would anticipate that our actual ending fund balance would be higher than this at the end of the year. And that is pretty normal for us and to be in that realm as we go forward. But from just a budgeted perspective, we'd have about $3,700,000 available to be appropriated at the end of the budget year. Again, I would anticipate that to be closer to 4.7 million in reality. The capital improvements fund, the main item that we changed there is we added in it's an additional 75,000 in interest, so that is at 100,000 instead of the 25,000 that was in there before. And then the Mount View Park pollinator expansion is in there at 30,000. And then I think I forgot to highlight the transfer in went from $2,750,000 to $2,780,000. That's that extra 30,000 for the pollinator planting expansion.
Is that an estimated cost or is that already been bid?
It's an estimated cost.
It's
Yeah,
estimated.
It could come back different,
Okay,
yeah. And depending on how we tailor, that, it could be, any number. in
seems
there.
a little high, but yeah, okay.
And then, so at the end, we would anticipate that we would have about $75,000 remaining in the capital projects fund at the end to be appropriated for other projects at the end of the year. Again, that can sometimes fluctuate depending on how we see revenues and expenditures come in.
Scott, can I ask just real
Uh-huh.
quick back on page 4, the available for appropriation at the end of the year? Could you do the percentage on that as well of the budget, like you did with the total fund balance? I just did it, but just kind of in the future, that would.
Yeah, I can add that in the future. I don't have it readily
With-
available.
I got
With under
14.6.
expend or what are you talking
No,
about?
just so that, because there's a difference between the total balance that's available, but the
Oh.
restrictions that we have on it.
Yeah,
And I tend to be a little more interested in the available for appropriation, because if that's money, outside of an emergency, that if something came up, you could spend, and just kind of,
yeah, I can add a percentage to that.
Yeah,
in the
that-
future.
so that would be appreciated.
Yep. And then. So let's see, we did capital improvements fund, stormwater fund. So in the stormwater fund, we did not originally have any interest revenue budgeted, and we added in $20,000 of interest revenue in there. Based on the fund balance that we have. And then I also adjusted the expense here by 20,000 as well. Since our goal is to have an ending $500,000 fund balance, and we can reserve that in there for just in case we need it. And so if we move forward, that's the items that were changed there. In the CDRA fund, we have 35,000 of interest. We had initially had $10,000 of interest, so that's an increase of $25,000. And then I also changed on this one, on this line item, we had $10,000 in there for professional fees related to CDRA projects. And I added that in. We typically match our interest to our anticipated professional fees there. If we don't spend it, it just stays in the fund and what have you. So on that one. So we would anticipate though in this that we would end with the same 1,530,000 that would be available for the Port Union and the corporate, the Cottonwood Corporate Center, older redevelopment areas that are there. In the debt service fund, there were no changes in there. The only thing is I had an incorrect amount in terms of the ending available for fund balance. That would be 894. I think I had 614 on the last document that was in. And that's all the specific changes that we had, and then that would all flow through down below. This is a good summary page that gives you a lot of good information at a high summary level. And then there's more detail in the individual fund summaries that follow this at the end. I don't know if there are any questions that you had that you wanted to go over.
The deadline is tomorrow or the next day?
I think we have 2 days.
Yeah, tonight's pretty critical.
Unless you all want to get together tomorrow. Next day, but yeah.
The interest income is something that we won't be able to count on forever, but
No.
we probably will see
It's been a
another
long
year.
time
of it.
since we've had anything significant in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably looking at another year of pretty good revenue again.
Yeah.
So, and then you never know after that. So great.
Yep.
And final questions, comments?
Bankers are always rich. Interest.
Yes.
Well, Scott, appreciate all the work you've done on this and the clarity that you bring to the whole process. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you.
So we, I'll echo those comments from Councilmember Burrell. Scott, thank you for all you do and for, I know this is a big undertaking and the council gets involved with you, and then we appreciate our city manager's involvement and everybody, all the department heads as well. So thank you. So we will be voting on this tonight. So Thank you. So we'll move on. Item 3B is a fiber provider discussion that I know everybody's just really anxious to talk about. And so I'll actually turn some time over to our city manager, Tim Tingley, and kind of give you a little bit of background of where we are to date, and then we'll delve into a discussion.
Yeah, so as you know, you probably all get a lot of calls and communications from residents on their concerns about options for fiber and so we've been, as you know, for 15 months, we've been working on evaluating this issue. We've met and had in this meeting many of the fiber providers, CenturyLink, Comcast, Google Fiber, as well as Utopia come in and present. For the residents, if they're watching, beyond that, we've had a lot of conversations with these different providers in a number of different meetings, trying to understand costs and implications and a variety of different other issues. And so we're going to be communicating in this next newsletter a pretty in-depth summary of what we've done to this point, but also communicate that we have not made any decisions because there are long-term financial implications with a variety of different options that we could consider with fiber. But that doesn't mean that we don't take this very seriously and want to make sure that we provide any way that we can to provide the best service for residents, but also take in the long-term implications of what the cost would be to the city. So anyway, that article you'll see in the next newsletter. We'll send out the draft of that newsletter shortly, and you can take a look at that article. But in addition to that, we've had meetings with other providers as well. We recently had a number of meetings with Google Fiber to really hone in on what the costs would be. And those meetings have occurred at a very technical level with the engineering staff, particularly with Matt Shipp and myself. I've been involved in that. We've had even meetings with management. Mayor Wickers, myself have been involved in that, as well as Matt, and had input from our city attorney as well. We were hoping that, and I think we mentioned this in the last one of our last conversations about meeting with them, is when we were originally negotiating prior to even during the COVID months, we had honed in on a license agreement, an excavation ordinance, and the city right-of-way manual, where we've been going back and forth with them on what they want to do with micro trenching. And we've provided initial response to them. They've come back with a number of different changes that they want to have. Even in one of the last technical meetings, we were hoping that they would look at both the arterials and connectors as not using micro trenching. And in one of the last technical meetings, they said no, they want to have the option for the 8-inch depth on all of the streets. They came back recently with an email saying that they modified that to look at boring on arterials, but then kind of a mix or potential mix on arterials. Before they sent that back to us, we indicated to them that we felt like we were further apart in our negotiations and that we were not willing, at least at this point, until we have a further conversation with the council, to have additional conversations. And that's when they followed up with making some changes on boring in certain elements. So anyway, that's where we're at with them. Utopia is still fairly the same. They have to have a take rate of a certain level. That take rate, we would have to back bonds that they would issue on that long term. And if they go below that take rate at any time during the bonds, we would have to cover financially the Utopia costs on that.
The difference between the revenues
Yeah.
and the bond.
And the bond, yeah.
And if they go over,
If they go over,
take rate is over,
then we don't have to cover
do
anything
we
necessarily.
get revenue?
I don't believe we do on that, but we need to
That's all right,
clarify that.
yeah.
Then,
The word is coming behind.
yeah, CenturyLink, Comcast, there's been some discussion obviously with them, but their long-term solutions to do a build out of the whole city is limited, at least from our understanding. So those are the four areas. The other thing I wanted to just mention is Bountiful City has recently gone through a process that's unique from all of these, in that they have bonded to, or they just approved the bonds to build their own fiber system for the city and have it run, implemented and run and operated after they did an RFP by Utopia. So they would own the backbone of the fiber lines, and then through their RFP, Utopia would run the system. They just approved that, and just to let you know, I went and sat down with the city manager to get the specifics of that. They have they bonded for roughly in the 43 to 47 million dollars to do a bond for this. They are, by the way, this was a 3.5-year process. It didn't just happen. They did a big study to evaluate what they felt the take rate would be before they even initiated this. After the 3.5 years, they finally came to a decision. They are one of the big reasons they did this is they do not have much debt at all right now, so they felt like they could take that on. What it means though is they had to float 5 million of that until they get the system built of the bonds, so they have to cover those payments until it's built and they start collecting the revenue. The specifics are the cost would be for 250 meg, it would be $70 to $78 for residents, somewhere in that area. 1 gig is $80 to $90. Debt service would cover from the revenues, $35 to $40 would go per resident would go to the debt service each month. And then they would put in $8 for capital reserve, and then the rest would go to Utopia and running the system. So anyway, that's kind of how they have set that up.
Going to Utopia or the providers that Utopia has on their system?
Both with that, but
Okay, so-
Utopia also running the system and then the providers as part of that.
Did they give you a percentage take rate that they would need?
35%.
That would break them even on their debt service.
That's what they had that entity come in and determine that 35% take rate. So I'm just throwing that out because we did some of that research, but the bottom line is that's where we're at. We still need to evaluate kind of where the council wants to go with whatever scenario you're looking at, but I wanted to make sure you understand or understood our research, and we will be communicating information to our residents on what we've been doing in the newsletter article.
Did we ever try to get a hold of, I know Verizon does fiber in the East Coast. Did we ever get an inquiry with them, or?
Have not at this point.
I mean, I don't know if they're anywhere. I think the furthest west they come is might be Kentucky, but that's Daniel Boone country, so it's west to some people.
Yeah.
Let me, I'll tell you, I was a little surprised. I was out visiting a friend a week and a half ago or so. And as we left their house, I didn't notice it on the way, but as I turned around and I was going from their house out to the main road, I was like, Google Fiber's here. And I was like, what? I said, you see that, right? It was very clear where the micro trenching was. Personal opinion, looked horrible, but Matt, the question for you, in the types of road surface repairs and maintenance that we do, would they all essentially cosmetically fix that look, or would a slurry sill have enough on it to actually where you're not seeing the 6-inch wide go down the road, or would that only be in an overlays case?
Only in an overlay case where, yeah, the slurry is just a thin layer of oil.
And so
And even
there's
that
another
big-
one that I'm not remembering, just
Well, the chip seal,
color
the
code or-
slurry that you're talking about, there's no structural integrity or value to those two surfaces. And this isn't just against micro trenching by any stretch. Any of our cracks will show through if we haven't crack sealed them, and even if we do crack seal them, the different materials you can see come through. Our surfacing doesn't change. You'll still see it, and it will still have the same effect of any other crack that's in there.
So cosmetically, one of the things that we talked about in one of the meetings, they would rather come out about 12 inches from the curb.
Mhm.
That's their preference. I said, cosmetically, I'd rather you go right next to the curb. Even Matt's, I think, opinion, he'd like that better because it's and I can't remember why you could tell us what the reasons that you gave, but, and they said if that's your preference, we would try to adhere to that when possible. There would be some instances where they said they could not do that.
But where I was kind of headed with this is, I mean, we did a 13% increase in our property tax that generated $800,000 to $900,000 of revenue in 2018 to do, and that was primarily focused at our 5-year plan on the maintenance program. But so my question was, if we did that again, how much of what we didn't do a whole lot of overlay on that plan. So I was just trying to get, if we were going to go through and fix that up and bring it up to quote where we are. It sounds like it's quite a bit more than I was thinking. It's not just going to be another $1 million a year to fix the cosmetics on it.
Well,
And people may very well be okay with that. I'm not saying I'm not okay with it. I'm just trying to.
for me, the cosmetics, I mean, this is the council, right? That's up to y'all. It's not the cosmetics of it, it's the structural integrity of it. I mean, a road can have structural soundness, but may not look the greatest. And that's sometimes difficult for the layperson to distinguish. Sometimes it's, it's fine. It just, it's had oxidation, it's got some minor hairline cracking going on, some things, it just doesn't look pretty, right? But it's still structurally sound. So I'm not sure where it's going on the question. The thing as you debate this and look into it, I don't have a dog in the fight other than you charge me to take care of the roads. Okay, that's my only dog in this fight. And I've given my opinion along the way on what it is. We need to, I guess, look at all of it and what the structural effect it has on the road. If we would crack seal just like we would anything else, we would follow a process of crack sealing. We would do that. My concern, and the mayor's also has brought this forward, is y'all this year, or this vote you're making, has close to $2.9 million in road reconstruction and maintenance. And that's what we've talked about for these next 5 years. As we reconstruct those roads, we're not talking just putting slurry on it now, we're talking taking it all up.
This was a heavy
rebuilding
year
it.
for
Yeah,
reconstruction.
this is a heavy 5 years coming up. The last 5 years, we kind of stopped the bleeding, and now we're trying to catch it, right? As we do that, the moratorium doesn't allow some of these projects to occur. But, so just keep that in mind as you're.
What's the moratorium? How long is the
2-year
moratorium?
moratorium, and then there's a
The 2-year?
2-year moratorium. But if they have to do work within the 2 years, they have to get approval from the council. And that council, and then the ordinance has the requirement. It doesn't change the requirement. They can only get permission from you. Once you give permission, they have to meet the ordinance requirements.
I know that's pretty
And that's
significant.
pretty heavy duty when you think about. So as we write, if I'm directed to change things, I need to, we have to write. Or specifically for this process, it's not as simple as just writing it. There's some things we have to put in it. So
And if I may add, that's what we've been working on with the ordinances. We've been
Correct.
talking with Google Fiber, that we haven't come down to.
Do we have in the discussions, do we have any say, well, we'd like you to go here or do here, get this first because that's a road that's scheduled to be redone?
We
Or
could,
this
we
is
could do
kind of
that. We would have in there that a 2-year moratorium on any roads that we've worked on.
But could we
recently.
tell them go here first because we're about
They
to
would have
reconstruct
to,
it?
yes.
I mean, and will they listen?
Well, good question.
So, and I'm just putting this out there because there seems to be a perception from a lot of people that Google Fiber is free. You're right. I probably should be less concerned about the cosmetics. I am concerned about the structure of the roads and what the ultimate cost is, because that does fall to us. So I don't see it as a freebie. We have dealt in the past with the council on organizations where we have the complete control over it, or a lot of control over it, and others where we, when you're dealing with the federal government rules, you have to do kind of what you're told. And so that's part of why I'm asking Matt these questions, because it doesn't look like I'm gonna get an easy answer, but there could easily be $1 million, $2 million of extra costs added until we get back caught up, to get our roads in structural. Happy to have.
Has the staff had a chance to interact with the key transportation official at both Sandy and Salt Lake City to find out what their post-Google micro trenching has meant, both in terms of the costs that Councilman Bracken is alluding to? Have we had a chance to, find out? Because I mean, Sandy's only went in 2 years ago.
Salt Lakes has been in longer.
Yeah, beyond Matt, if he's had some conversations, but we have had, Mayor and I were in a meeting where the mayor of Salt Lake stated some concerns about the structural integrity of some of the streets with this, especially closer to the shoulder areas, and that was what was expressed. I don't know if you've had any specific conversations with the engineers there.
I've had some conversations. I'm not really necessarily, we haven't done any real study into it. There's a lot of anecdotal discussions we've had.
Yeah, I mean, that would be meaningful to me to understand in the couple of years since Sandy implemented it throughout its city. What the short term, what they would say, oh, I wish we had negotiated this, or wow, they didn't tell us about that, and this is what has ended up to affect 30% of our roads. Or I mean, I would hope they would be forthcoming, one of their engineers with you. To me, that would be meaningful, because again, they just went through it, and now Salt Lake is far enough away from it that, substantial information out of them would be meaningful to me, because I'm concerned about the infrastructure. My son lives in Sandy, so I go over and get the volleyball and play all kind of things with the kids in the street. So I mean, I'm really familiar with what it looks like. It's not the most attractive thing, but in terms of deterioration to our roads, since that's our highest expenditure in any given year, I just don't want to jeopardize and create like some kind of an onerous new budget item that we aren't. Google isn't wanting to really be.
Yeah, so if I can, let me thank you for all of these comments. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context and more background, if I can, just a little bit. So we've had the discussion about I think we're down to one of 2 cities in the county that are not working on fiber to the home for everybody. So to me, during campaigning, since I've been the mayor, it's by far the number one issue that's come to me. Hey, when are we going to am I going to be able to get fiber to my home? So to me, there is a charge to if at all possible, to get fiber to the home for every one of our residents. The options that we've talked about, there's not a perfect option. We've talked about, Tim did a good background on Utopia. In my discussions with Google from the very beginning, I have said to them, look, would you be willing to change the way you trench on our arterials and collectors? So Highland Drive in Fort Union, and then our Bengal and our 23rd East, and the roads that receive higher traffic. And we at one point we thought we'd come to a resolution where where they had some agreement to that. About a month ago, it came back and said, "Hey, it looks like we're just going to we would micro trench everything," which for people that don't understand what we're saying with micro trench, that's 8 inches below. That's all. They're going down 8 inches. So basically, they're going below the asphalt into the road base. So the road base is the fill that we bring in to build a road. All of our other utilities are 2 to 3 feet down below. They're 24 to 36 inches below. So they're safe. We consider them in a safe distance down below the road. So when they said that, I asked staff if they would that they weren't, asked them to let Google know they weren't gonna get a majority, and we needed to probably stop negotiating with Google. As Tim mentioned, they came back and said that maybe there was some miscommunication, and they have said that they would burrow, which means putting fiber 2 to 3 feet below on Highland and Fort Union. And they gave us a bunch of maybes on our other roads, on Bengal, on 23rd. All of the other roads that we expressed concern that had to get enough traffic that we would be concerned about a micro trench. They came back and came with some maybes. So the good news is we are in a negotiating strategy with Google that if they came back and said, we will burrow, we'll put that fiber 2 to 3 feet down below your road on every one of our arterials and collectors, that would be, to me, a big deal, and I'd probably be in favor of moving forward with Google. I'll tell you that right now. So,
Sorry, I just had this other, actually from a cosmetic and even a structural standpoint, doing a micro trench on a street that's getting traffic. I mean, since I've been on the council, we've redone Fort Union a number of times.
yeah,
We've redone Highland because they handle so much traffic. They weren't, their regional roads were able to get help elsewhere. I mean, just, that was just, there's unknown longer term costs with Google. Absolutely. I just want the public, and I agree. I think we should do something to get fiber to the home. I just don't want the perception that it's somehow free and at no charge to be out there, because there is a cost. The cost with Utopia is if we don't get the take rate, we start paying some of those bonds, and we're on the hook for 20 years. But we don't have to worry about the structure of the road because they do it the same way everybody else in the world builds their fiber.
so, I think one of the things you're discounting, Scott, is if we are doing the exact same thing as Utopia on our arterials and collectors, our road integrity and structure, we are not going to have the issues of as many issues of road integrity and in our residential neighborhoods, because they don't receive the amount of traffic for a micro trench. That's where I've been going with this. If we could get our arterials and collectors done the exact same way that the Utopia would do it, to me, that would be a pretty big concession that they haven't done for anybody. And they've already said they'll do it on Fort Union and Highland. So the integrity of those two roads, which are big, would be the same as what if we did our own fiber or Utopia. So anyway,
So they will still micro trench to the other streets.
residential
And
streets.
see, that's where I still have some consternation about it. When we're looking at something that if we have an incident take place, something happens to that fiber, we're stuck with that cost. One of the gaps that we're not discussing right now is the improvement of technology through broadband. And in going to these broadband meetings through GoEd, companies like AT&T are coming up with the wireless. They're coming up with systems that'll work in our just like our cell phones do for broadband. If we can avoid incurring a lot of costs for our residents, I want to get everything, first of all, I want to get this to our residents that don't have the 5G and everything else they get to. But I don't want to incur unnecessary cost when technology is going to catch up to us and bite us in the butt. I don't want to see that be the case.
I think that's a really, really good point. And it's one of the reasons why I even think struggle more with Utopia. But if the technology takes 10 years, are we willing to let our residents
They're already
be
testing
without
that.
fiber in 10 years?
Well, no,
Well,
I agree.
Yeah.
I want them to have it, but I know from looking at the technology that AT&T is working on now, they've got test sites where they're doing this. So how fast is that gonna move? We don't know. But
yeah.
it's not gonna take 10 years. I get it. I can tell you that. They're gonna be
Okay,
coming.
what, I guess I've heard this argument for over 20 years. And it has absolutely, the argument hasn't changed and the results haven't changed. What technology you're talking?
We've seen it changed in our cell phone. We're
No,
watching this
no,
computer
no,
right
no,
here.
that's that. What are you talking about, 18? If you're talking 5G mobile networks to the house, that's it. Again, that's all gonna be based out of fiber.
Mhm.
If the idea is fiber for reliability, speed, and the other things, wireless is never gonna be, a radio broadcast is never gonna match it or meet it. Because it's always gonna be based on fiber. Every single,
Comcast
I would
technology.
say, watch out. I would say,
What?
watch out.
Well, again, I-
Research of where I'm going through, listening to what the folks that are doing it. You've got to be careful with what technology is out there right now that we just don't have here in our area that they're still testing. And that's my only point. I just hate to see us do something that's gonna end up costing us in the long run.
oh.
Yeah.
I said, it's been 20 years of going through that, and and while wireless speeds and Comcast speeds and fiber speeds have all increased, Utopia was originally doing 100 base T, now they're doing 10 gig. It's when it comes to the race that the turtle's never catching up because
Well-
the rabbit's always out there.
Well, my comment would be, linked to, Councilman Newell's, and that, I'm no expert on this, but when I hear about where Starlink is providing adequate service in very remote places, people on their houseboats in Lake Powell, a lot of, I often use my son because he's a professional who has 2 screens up in his home office and works for Deloitte, and he is doing work down on a houseboat in Lake Powell through Starlink and in other remote locations. And I would really like to feel like we've thoroughly looked into, what the cost associated with Starlink is and how does that really stack up with what we're currently comparing to? I know you see it as not viable.
It's an apple and an orange. It really is. You're talking about sufficient. That's a whole different than what fiber the home can and typically does do. That goes way beyond what sufficient is for 99.8% of the people who live in their houses. No one is ever going to touch that. Well, not ever. Eventually they may get there, but most people don't get anywhere near actually needing that. But again, what we're hearing and what people are demanding is I want fiber to the home. So comparing that apple to an orange that is sufficient for all the needs, that's where I'm trying to make that
We're
distinction.
responsible to give them all the information that's available. And to not leap to something,
So
and skip some information that could be critical to impacting us as a city.
So let me add just a couple more points. I know anyway. With the increase of work from home and home businesses, people that need really good, fast, reliable internet and speeds and uploads and downloads. Without fiber, you're gonna struggle. You're gonna struggle. So, one of the things that I mentioned before, Comcast's technology is fiber. Comcast has fiber all through our city, and then they, instead of going fiber to the home, they go coaxial, which is where they lose their speed. So,
That's where
any
fiber
type of
comes in.
any type of new technology would be fiber and then Wi-Fi from that fiber, which you're not going to get the reliability of the continuous to fiber. That doesn't mean to say that that's not here. There's not a company out there that we know of that we can call to say, hey, come, give us a better option. And so companies need reliable gigs up and down, or not companies, homes. And so anyway.
So that's what the people are asking for.
Yeah.
And the way to get that, I don't see it happening on any kind of a wireless. They just haven't honed that in there. I just spent a week on Starlink hookups. It was unfortunately not as good as former experiences I had. It will get better. For what I was doing, it was sufficient, but if it is really a hardcore to work from home, going direct and not doing a modem change between a wireless to a fiber optics or electronics or coax, that you're gonna have more reliability. So, but neither way is free. And it's not, you know,
So Matt, would you? So the patching that, so the neighborhood micro trenching, so let's say we come to an agreement that they burrow our big roads and they micro trench our neighborhoods. The current language, and maybe even Shane could help, that Google has in their responsibility to keep their trench at a good working drivable area. What does that currently say?
Well, it
Does that make
doesn't,
sense?
there's nothing currently written right now. But in our discussions with them, and this goes to the residential, there's two things on the residential. First, Google has stated, now we haven't tied it down, right? But they have stated that for the time, like we're doing our 5-year program, if they go in and trench or micro trench and they crack seal like they plan on, and there's an issue with that crack seal, they will repair that at their cost until such time as we do surface work on that road. So within 5 years, like worst case scenario, they would maintain it. If they did it in year 1 and that road did come around for 5 more years, they would maintain that joint, if you will.
So
for
if
the
it failed
5
after
years.
that, would it be our responsibility?
After that, it becomes our responsibility once we surface. So if we go through and do a chip seal, a slurry seal, or we go through and reconstruct, at that point, any failures,
Would
They would-
the vendor have liability? I mean, if we tell a vendor to come and slurry seal it, why wouldn't we expect them to create a good enough road over that trench?
well, the slurry seal is not a, like I said, it is just there's no structural integrity to it. Now, if it's reconstruction, that's a different story. Okay.
that would be.
Cracks in asphalt are guaranteed to do one thing, and that's continue to go through the next layer. They will always reflect. So there's that. The other issue is if we go in and reconstruct, for instance, tonight you're voting on the capital projects, right? Or the road budget. Prospector subdivision is slated to be reconstructed completely, and that's tearing the whole thing up. Road base, down curb and gutter in places, road base, tearing it all up and building it back up because it is too far gone to do anything with. If a micro surfacing goes in, micro trenching goes in, they're down 8 inches. We're going to rip it out. The entire network will be ripped out. So to have them go in before us is fine. We're just going to come in and tear it up. And then we have to wait until we're done constructing that neighborhood, putting it back together, and then they would make application to come in and do a moratorium cut, whereby they would go in and micro trench the new road and then have to follow the ordinance, which then requires them to repave. I mean, it really becomes a snowball effect. So that's my concern when it comes to reconstruction using this process, because I guarantee it, we will take it out of the ground in reconstruction. Old construction trenching, I have my reservations and I've made those known, but we can make things work. It's not like it's the worst thing in the world. Cosmetically, sure, they have said we'll maintain the trench, the what?
Junction.
Yeah, they'll maintain these things until such time as we go through and put a surface on top of it. Whether that's, but that's not in writing yet. That is just in discussions that I have had back and forth, and I believe Tim was in one of those meetings when we've had that actual discussion. So,
Nice to actually have in writing which roads are gonna bore.
and that's,
Maybe.
and that's the reference Mayor has made, that they, after they came back and said, okay, well, let's think about this. So when you talk about it, I think it kind of pushed us into the next level of negotiations, if you will. So that's where it would, yeah, they said two definitely, a handful of maybes. So
How does it work with the state road?
That's what I was just gonna ask. What about the state road we've got?
You know, SR 190 and SR 210,
they would make them bore it.
would that be in our contract?
No, it would, they would have to
The
get
state
right
would
of way
make them.
permits from the state
Yeah, they have to get.
to be able to go through. And the state would probably make them bore, and my chances are they'll just cross. They won't do any lateral trenching. They'll just, I mean, longitudinal trenching, they'll just cut across.
So what we, if we were negotiating with them and bringing things for your consideration, a license agreement is one, and then changes to our excavation ordinance and right-of-way manual is what would have to be adopted with the license agreement, those three things, which would codify what we would allow with micro trenching, because right now it's not something we allow, as well as the license agreement would spell out a variety of different things. So if we were to bring, if that was the decision you wanted to move forward with, we'd have to negotiate that and bring those agreements before you.
So we will leave it at, we're still trying as hard as we can. This is the, you know, it was when I was campaigning, I'm like, I'm gonna get Google Fiber, or I'm gonna get fiber, I promise you. And unfortunately, that's not how easy it was, but
We can do that. We obviously, there have been a lot of cities in the immediate neighborhood who just said, yep, go. And we can, and if we say the exact same thing, we'll be in the exact same.
Yeah.
But at least at the council level, I think we need to understand. Because Matt's in the right thing. We got to keep our, there's a long-term cost to it. So it's not just, to me, it's never been just say, yeah, go ahead and go. But if that's, you know, if that's what our citizens want, I think it is fair to make sure that they understand these are the long-term costs. But I could say, that's okay, if we buy this, it's gonna cost this much all right, I get that, and you sign the contract and you move on.
agreed. Thank you, appreciate that. Okay, item C. Under staff reports is a zoning text amendment, and so we will be having a public hearing on this during our business meeting, Mike, but so why don't you give us some background on this for us?
Sure, thanks, Mayor. I'll share my screen in a minute, but just to kind of introduce this was a city initiated, kind of staff initiated zoning text amendment. Over time, as we administer the zoning ordinance, there are situations and questions and interpretations that need to be made that aren't clearly answered in the ordinance. So there have been in the city's history a number of times where we've done what we call zoning interpretations, where we, you know, if there's a question that comes up a lot and there's not a clear answer on the code, we basically document, okay, here's how we're interpreting this thing, and this is how we're going to do that moving forward. The idea is once you make a formal interpretation like that, that you then later incorporate that into the ordinance. And it's been a number of years since that has happened. So this is just the kind of the first in an effort to do that. This is a lot of very minor technical, you know, just incorporating definitions of things into the zoning ordinance, and we're just asking that those changes be formally adopted. So I will walk through what those are quickly. And you'll get a sense as we talk through these of kind of how technical some of this stuff is. So the first proposed change is just codifying a definition that's actually found in state code, most regularly associated with like alcohol licensing or tobacco sales or things like that are regulated by the state, but it's defining what entrance of outlet means. Basically, what that means is just the public entrance to a public location or a commercial location. We are just proposing to codify that formally in Title V, which is our business license ordinance. And I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. This packet was provided to you. If there are any questions, feel free to stop me. The second proposed change is adding a definition of paved surface into the ordinance. We've run across this on numerous occasions where someone is asking if gravel it qualifies as a paved surface, or basically what the threshold is for something being considered a parking space or a paved surface on a commercial or residential property. We've had an interpreted definition of this. We're now just proposing to adopt that. And basically what it is an improved surface generally utilized for parking or access covered by asphalt, concrete, or other hard surface materials as approved by the DRC. It excludes dry gravel, so uncompacted gravel is not a paved surface and similar materials as a finished product, but allows for the use of permeable pavement as approved by the DRC. So we've just gone through the city code and added this definition in any title where it refers to parking or paved surfaces. So that's Title 11, which is our vehicles and traffic title, Title 12, which is subdivisions, and then Title 19, which is zoning. And we've just made sure that definition is consistent throughout the code. The third proposed change is actually removing something that was in the ordinance that we found to be a little bit problematic. And that was a provision that allowed basically if someone built something that didn't meet code and it went unreported for a period of 5 years, whether it was legal or not, then someone could apply to have that use or structure be basically retroactively considered legal. Mainly on the basis that no one reported it for 5 years, which we think is problematic. You know, if a use is in violation of the ordinance, it shouldn't be just up to, you know, your neighbors didn't report it for 5 years, so it's okay. So we have removed this, that provision from the ordinance. It also sent that through the Planning Commission. This is really more of a kind of a variance or non-conforming use kind of tool that would normally run through the city's hearing officer. So we've proposed to remove that, that whole provision from the ordinance. We had only seen this used once very recently, where someone installed some sheds in their side yard that were reported by a neighbor. And the applicant used this provision to make a request of the Planning Commission to allow those sheds to stay, and it was denied. The fourth proposed change is just language regarding carports. We've always considered carports to be either accessory structures if they're not attached to the home, or if they're attached to the home, they are subject to the same setbacks and zoning standards as the home itself, or a deck, or anything else that would be attached to a house. And then there have been a few cases in the past where a commercial carport has been constructed, and there haven't been very clear provisions in the ordinance for how to cover those. So the interpretation was made a number of years ago, and we're just proposing to codify that now. First of all, defining the difference between residential and non-residential carports in terms of the dimensions and standards that those would need to meet to be considered carports. And then also adding in the language, basically saying residential carports have to meet the same zoning standards as any other structure in a residential zone. And then adding in some definition and requirement for non-residential carports, where they can be on a property, and then certain instances where they actually require architecture approval if they're prominent from the public right of way. There's an architectural review process that we're proposing that they need to go through. And then there was another provision that was just conflicting, that basically said a carport is an ornamental feature that isn't subject to setback, but elsewhere in the ordinance, carport is subject to setback, which is our intention. So we've cleaned that up as well and removed carport from the definition of ornamental feature. The next one is ordinary projections. This is similar to what I was just talking about. There are certain kind of aesthetic or cosmetic things where we don't require them to meet the same setback standards as other things. And that'd be like, you know, a roof overhang or a chimney or a decorative feature that projects above or out from a structure. Again, we've cleaned that up to remove carports from being considered an ordinary projection as well, with the intention, again, that carports need to meet the same standards as any other structure. We've slightly proposed a change to the non-conforming use section. There's a provision that's been in the ordinance that allows if you have a non-conforming building, basically a home that was built at a time where, you know, the way it was built met code, and over years setbacks or other regulations have changed, so it's considered non-conforming or grandfathered in. We have a process right now where if you want to add on to that or expand it in any way, you can do that through an application process to the appeals hearing officer. However, that was specifically, the language was non-conforming buildings can be expanded. Just for clarity's sake, we have added buildings and structures as part of that definition. So, you know, any non-conforming element that was once legally approved on a site may be subject to this process. You know, the example comes up of a non-conforming structure, but not a building. Might be like a street light or you know, some other sort of structural portion of a property that's not a building per se, but it is part of the use of a property. So we think this cleans up that section well and still meets the intent of that. And the other one that was in here before that the Planning Commission removed was basically doggy daycare and some provisions for a doggy daycare use and where they're allowed. The Planning Commission brought up some good questions and some concerns about that, so we have removed that, are reassessing that, and then we'll bring that forward in a future update. So like I said, that's the extent of what's proposed. This has gone through the Planning Commission process. There were no public comments on this. The Planning Commission unanimously recommended approval after removing doggy daycare. And staff's goal is to kind of take these forward, you know, three, 4 times a year, just to kind of clean up some of these inconsistencies and add these interpretations that have been in place for a long time, just not in the ordinance. Any questions on these?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment as you went through these. If we go back to the definition 11.04010 that pertain to clarifying a paved surface. And while I understand that you know, you're looking for that particular definition, I think it's important. I want to read something from Salt Lake City's road manual that I think that we need to really think about as we think about impervious surfaces such as paved surfaces. And I'll be quick on this. Given Salt Lake City's large rights of way and climate, it is important that the design, funding, operations, and maintenance processes solve drainage, snow clearing, and snow storage issues. Wide, impervious roadways create excessive runoff that, during storm events, may exceed the capacity of existing utilities. Narrower roads and more pervious areas and softer streetscape features will ensure that existing utilities are not overloaded and that stormwater is appropriately handled before it enters a pipe. So I just want to make sure that we're not creating language that encourages necessarily all driveways and everything to be impervious pavement versus the option for residents where they want to put in gravel in their driveways or other places that they're not impeded in that process. Because I think, again, you know, we need to look at the cumulative effect over the years and decades ahead of you know, pervious versus so much impervious paving.
Yeah, thank you. I will say we're all for pervious paving, which is allowed under paved surface. 99% of the cases where we see this definition come up is when code enforcement gets a call Actually, we'll talk about this in a little bit, of someone parking a vehicle or trailer and wanting to do that legally and asking if they can use, just lay a little bit of gravel down in their grass and call that good. And then we run into an issue of engine oils and things like that seeping into the ground if it's not properly compacted or paved, or at least vetted in some way where a pervious surface can be filtered or whatever else. So we have left room for pervious options there. And in our sensitive lands ordinance, we actually have today a limitation on how much impervious surface can be used. None of that's changing. This is just defining when someone is building something that needs to be paved, what that is, and mainly what it can't be, which is loose gravel, which does cause issues between neighbors and kind of getting on the sidewalk, and doesn't actually work very well as a parking surface for a trailer or something like that.
All right, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Mike. Appreciate that, explanation. Anyway, so I'm going to, so we want to welcome Councilmember Matt Holton here, so.
Yeah, apologies for being tardy.
Don't be put down.
I
Yeah.
had a good friend pass and wanted to try to get there and show my respect, so apologize for that.
Thanks for being here. So item D is SLEDS, which is the acronym for Sensitive Lands Evaluation and Development Standards. So we're gonna have Mike again give us some updates on the ordinance that we're looking at updating.
Thank you. Yeah, given the recent council member change in District 1, I thought it would be good just one more time to kind of go through maybe the outline of the riparian ordinance provisions that have been modified and reworked and are almost done in a revised final draft. We had a town hall meeting back in February where it was very well attended by residents concerned about some of the previous regulations that were being proposed in terms of development near open waterways. And we've made some changes. We've been working hard to incorporate some of those changes in the revised draft ordinance. So I thought it may be beneficial just one more time before we get into the actual full ordinance rewrite, which is tentatively scheduled for the next meeting to start getting into that, to quickly go over those riparian changes one more time. And then I've got some follow-up on the better defining where Wasatch Boulevard is as it pertains to a slope development exception that I'll cover as well. If that sounds all right, then I'll just proceed that way.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Okay. And again, I will try to be brief. I know we've talked about these things numerous times. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but this has generated a lot of interest. So I'm just going to keep
I don't
going
think I
through
saw
it.
Matt at those meetings, so it's probably.
Yeah. So when we talk SLEDS, I think maybe I'll start here. SLEDS is an acronym for Sensitive Lands Evaluation and Development Standards. It's an ordinance we have because a lot of areas in the city are home to kind of natural hazards or potential natural hazards. And depending on where you are in the city, that may look very different. So the ordinance itself is an existing ordinance that we are proposing an update to. This actually the update process began in 2019 at the direction of the council at that time. So it's been in the works for a while. The objective is to update all the standards found in our sensitive lands ordinance to the highest and best practice for identifying, studying, and mitigating hazards in the city. Particularly during new development activities, which is an important thing to just reiterate. The SLEDS ordinance applies pretty exclusively when new development or substantial redevelopment in the city is taking place. The ordinance rewrite process, we have consulted with a number of area experts, both locally and regionally. Geostrata is our consultant geologist that we use, particularly when we're reviewing development in areas with fault lines or steep slopes or liquefaction or other hazards like that. City staff obviously did a lot of research and was very heavily involved in this. We've also consulted with FEMA, the Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Forest Service, the Utah Geologic Survey, fault experts, Salt Lake County Flood Control, and then experts from the local universities. The different hazards regulated in the SLEDS ordinance are listed here. And again, these are all hazards that are mentioned in the ordinance today. The riparian section, riparian corridor and waterways are mentioned as a hazard today. It's just missing the actual regulations. But all of these things are mentioned as hazards in the ordinance today. This gives you an idea of how broadly scoped this ordinance is and why it's taken so long to get through this rewrite. But it regulates surface fault rupture, so fault lines, earthquake hazards, liquefaction, debris flows, and alluvial fan issues, rockfall hazards. And then it also switches to kind of flood hazards as well, groundwater source protection, high groundwater, and then riparian corridors and kind of watershed standards as well. So when you see the full draft again in a couple of weeks, the SLEDS ordinance will include all of those things. There's been some, some people have been interested in one hazard over another. So I think over time, SLEDS has become a little bit synonymous with just riparian standards, but I just wanted to clarify that it is much more than that. But now I'll just move through kind of those riparian protection standards as they were proposed, kind of where they came from, and then where we've landed on them. A riparian protection area basically is an area along a waterway and its adjacent ground that we call riparian areas. Having standards in place governing development around those areas can help protect water quality. They can minimize flood hazards to structures. They can stabilize waterway banks and reduce erosion. And they can also allow for groundwater recharge as well. This is kind of a flow of why we have drafted these riparian standards. They're already included by reference in the existing sensitive lands ordinance. However, the chapter that it refers to chapter 17.31 for more detail on the riparian standards. And then when you go to that chapter, it doesn't exist. So we are proposing to add those in now. The approach we took in developing these was actually similar to the approach we took in developing or in refining the standards for all of the other hazards that we regulate. We looked basically at the standard practice, best practices for, in this case, riparian management from other local and regional ordinances. We consulted with local and federal regulatory agency partners and experts. And then we tried to tailor that into the city's current approach in how we regulate sensitive lands hazards during new development. So this is a very high level, but we've combined kind of those three things together to develop this draft ordinance. You won't find this language in any other, one ordinance. It wasn't like it was taken from one thing and just pasted into the city ordinance. We did do a lot of work to try to make it fit Cottonwood Heights' kind of unique situation. So just in general, this is kind of a breakdown of how we apply riparian protection standards and how this is done most commonly. So as a standard in practice in riparian management, the draft utilizes a buffer area system, basically which breaks the land adjacent to a waterway into several different areas that regulate what is allowed within them pertaining to new development. The closer you are to that waterway, the more strictly regulated it is, because the more sensitive that area is to the flood hazards and erosion and other things like that. The concept focuses on guiding new development to be harmonious with sensitive waterway areas, in consistency with other sensitive lands hazards and procedures. This approach is not unlike our approach to particularly fault line development near fault lines and development near steep slopes. Basically, the closer you are, there's a minimum distance you have to be away from those hazards. And then the closer you are to those, the more you have to study them to ensure that what you're building is safe and isn't going to make that hazard more unsafe. So based on quite a bit of public input and council discussion, a new draft is being prepared that kind of tweaks where the standards were, I would say, 6 months ago. But what we've done is we've amended buffer areas and setbacks. We've amended maintenance related uses from requirements to regulations, or from requirements and regulations to recommendations. things like fertilizer usage, tree maintenance, et cetera. We have a lot of recommendations for how to do those things the closer you get to waterways, but this most recent draft is really emphasizing, the regulatory part of it applies to new development. And then we have a lot of recommendations if you own property or live along a waterway for how best to maintain that as much as possible without trying to tiptoe into telling you how to maintain your trees or how to fertilize your ground. We are proposing to eliminate additional regulatory steps if review is already required by another agency. In this case, Salt Lake County Flood Control has a lot of development standards and development requirements that they require to be followed. So rather than reinvent the wheel or use a different wheel, we're just saying, hey, if there's another agency that you have to meet the standards of, go through that process and just show us that you've gone through it. And they're the experts, you'll be good to go. And then again, a more specific focus on new development activity requirements. So minimum setbacks for new structures based on use type, limiting the potential negative impact of new development while assuring the continued use of existing development, and then adding some clarifications to procedures for exceptions in certain cases. So this shows you kind of back as we proposed this or presented this at the town hall meeting in February, some of the existing standards at the time and now what you'll see being proposed. We had divided the different buffering systems into basically the size of the lot. So if you had a smaller property, you could develop a little bit closer to the waterway. If you had a larger property, that setback for a new structure had to be increased. Rather than draw the line by property size and try to do it that way, what we've come back with as a recommendation is let's regulate it by use type, where you have the larger setback area is going to apply to commercial type development. So your heavier commercial development types that would allow for more impact, larger buildings, more heavy development. We are still proposing that new development in those zones and those use types would be subject to a larger setback area from the waterway. We don't want a large commercial type building really, really close to the waterway for numerous reasons. But then we've basically categorized any of our single family and even our lower density multifamily. So our 2-family zoning type development, we've grouped those in the smaller setback category, which would be restricted to a 20-foot buffer from the waterway, which actually matches Salt Lake County Flood Control's minimum setback. Previously, this was a 25-foot setback for the smaller lot development, and then further regulated depending on how much building you had in that kind of next closest area. We've just simplified that. So it's 50 feet minimum setback for new commercial or heavier development, a 20-foot setback for the lower density residential type development.
Mike?
Yeah.
The only one there that I'll probably have to review it, but our RO zone might fit better in group 1 rather than group 2. I'll just put it out there because some of our RO is a lot more intense than what I think wasn't originally envisioned. So it's
Sure.
Anyway,
yeah, we certainly can do that.
Let's keep an eye on and see what people say and because there's a lot of stuff that's allowed in RO that may not constitute. I'll have to look at it, but if you'll make a note, let's review that.
Certainly. And one that's not in here that I do want to just bring up is our RM, which is residential multifamily. That's our higher density multifamily. That it's just omitted by typo in this presentation. That would be a group 1, larger setback where you can see larger multifamily apartment or condo buildings. The impact of a use like that and, the amount of people using it would warrant a larger setback in staff's opinion. So that would be part of your group 1. But
when I see what's on the west side of Highland Drive, in respect to this ordinance, I would think RO probably fits in group 1.
Sure. Yeah, we certainly can look at that and make note.
And Mike, group 2 proposed is still a recommendation for existing, is that correct?
Well, so so what you're seeing here would be new structures in these zones, brand new development in these areas. And again, if there was an existing home today that wanted to go build a shed or a structure, Salt Lake County flood control is already going to require a 20-foot setback. So we're basically saying for single family residential, follow what Salt Lake County flood control has already regulated, for years and years. We're not going to do anything more restrictive than that. All we're asking is you show us a copy of their approval, as part of your building permit process.
So before
And then
we-
this is where this slide here, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, this slide here is where we had some requirements previously that have become recommendations, and they're all the things that are, more maintenance of existing uses. Fertilizer application, landscaping close to the bank area, tree maintenance and removal, yard grading, erosion control, bank stabilization, flood control, things like that. We're going to keep some of the language in, but as recommendations rather than requirements. The erosion control, the grading, some of the tree maintenance even is regulated by Salt Lake County Flood Control. So we're also just to kind of cover that, saying anything that currently requires a permit, whether a building permit through the city or Salt Lake County Flood Control or FEMA, floodplain or Army Corps of Engineer permission, you still have to go through that. We're just not requiring anything on top of that. So so here, no additional city permitting necessary for maintenance work. If a permit is required by other agencies, a copy of that approved permit should be provided to the city. We think that's reasonable if you're supposed to go through those other procedures anyways, to just provide that. Again, we assume they're the experts and they will regulate a lot of the things that we were concerned about when we were drafting the ordinance. Okay, so there are proposed regulations for new development still included in the new ordinance, and those will be regulations for new structures, brand new construction, accessory buildings like sheds or pools or any other sort of detached garages or anything like that. Retaining walls, which require permit review already. And then additional review during rezone or subdivision of property. If you're proposing to intensify your use on a property or subdivide it and develop it beyond what is already existing today, a review of this ordinance would be triggered. Animal enclosures. This was one of the points of feedback we got from Salt Lake County Flood Control, saying a lot of their issues during non-flood season is in regards to contamination of waterways. With open animal enclosures close to the waterway. So we are still proposing that new enclosures be located at least 20 feet away from the waterway area. Existing enclosures, if there are any that are closer than that, they don't have to be relocated, but they can't be expanded. They would have to be moved if they were built new or expanded substantially. And then parking lot areas, we don't want to see paved parking lots right up to the top of the bank. That creates a number of issues. So single family, low density development, we are proposing a 20-foot top of bank setback, and then no limitations for how much building can be in the zone that's further than 20 feet away. Again, matching exactly what Salt Lake County Flood Control has required for a long time. Commercial and high density development, we are proposing a 50-foot setback. We've looked at where in the city this could feasibly apply to. Mainly it's along Big Cottonwood Creek, really in the Old Mill area. So there's not a ton of commercially zoned property today near any of these riparian areas. Most of it is residential in the city, but that Old Mill area does have a commercial zoning and is located by the Big Cottonwood Creek. So this is the primary area that would apply to, unless someone came in and tried to rezone residential property to something that allowed higher density in the future, then it could expand where it applies. So 50-foot setback, and then development in that next zone beyond 50 feet would be subject to DRC review to determine the impact of that building of that area. Tree protection plan will be suggested as part of commercial development applications. So subdivisions, rezones, conditional use permits, things like that apply to commercial or high density uses. We We are proposing some language that says, if you have to take an inventory of the trees, especially in that area closest to the top of bank. We don't want to see a large commercial development just go in and rip out healthy, mature trees if they don't have to. So we are going to be proposing language requiring a tree protection plan, but again, only for those large new developments or redevelopment applications. This is already consistent with some existing procedures. We've done this before for conditional uses, for planned development district, the Walsh property built development over off of 1300 East and the west end of the city had to do a tree protection plan. So there is some precedent for this, but not during new single family or two family development. If it's just a building permit for a single family home, that standard would not apply. Again, we're still proposing that new animal enclosures and debris storage near banks should be regulated. The other common issue Salt Lake County Flood Control mentioned is debris getting in the waterways, as we're all familiar with now. There was a large effort to get people to clean debris out of their waterways. So we don't want to see any storage areas being started or held close to the waterway locations, because they do cause those flood hazards. And then again, all development near creek requires applicable permits from outside agencies. And our ordinance will just ask that they provide a copy of that to the city as part of the city's building permit process. And then we're proposing a number of different exceptions in the ordinance as well. And this tries to get at a lot of the existing buildings that are located, close to waterways today, or maybe, grandfathered in from a previous ordinance in some way. Voluntary modification or expansion of a non-conforming structure. We already have a provision in the city code. I talked about it on the last item. We're just saying if you are expanding a non-conforming structure, we'd like to see that, not get closer to the top of the bank. If a house is already within 20 feet of the top of the bank and you want to expand it, we have a procedure you can go through, but expand it away from the top of the bank area. Reconstruction of structures destroyed involuntarily. This is allowed, and this always has been. If a building is destroyed by a fire or flood or other some sort of act of nature involuntarily, we have an ordinance right now that allows you to rebuild that structure as it previously was through the permitting process, but we don't do. If a house gets destroyed, you don't have to then meet new setbacks. If it didn't previously, you're allowed to rebuild what you had. And then a reasonable use exception. On a case-by-case basis, owners may request exceptions if standards would otherwise prohibit reasonable development. This is kind of a catch-all, but if there's anything in the ordinance that makes it impossible to develop, there is a reasonable use process listed in there. So we feel that there are some good options here that helped mitigate a lot of the concerns we heard a while ago over the maintenance concerns and the language that was proposed there for fertilizer and tree removal. And a lot of those were addressed prior to that town hall meeting, but it did help to clarify those things. And then we have options, for anything that we might not be thinking of. We have, you can see here, 3 different, exception procedures that still allow ongoing use of properties. So this ordinance really now does fall pretty well in line with the rest of the sensitive lands ordinance, in that it really is geared at making sure the impacts of new development are mitigated from this natural hazard, just as we do with the other types of hazards in the ordinance. Any questions on this? And like I said, the full ordinance will come forward. We'll talk more about this. We want to kind of get this going again. So this will be discussed at the next council meeting, and then I think we'll plan to get it on for public comment shortly thereafter and keep it going.
So you're looking to have a proposed draft available on the website before our next meeting?
Yes. Yeah, hopefully by the end of next week. That's the goal.
And we have the list of email addresses from people who attended the town hall, and we'll make sure they know when it gets posted.
Yes.
And in short, it sounds like recommendations, some folks being grandfathered, but given recommendations, and then new regs placed on new construction.
That's what we've really tried to do here with these revisions. Is the strictest regulations are applied to new development. We have guidelines for how, we'd like to see you maintain your property, but they're just guidelines. They're just recommendations. So we've made an effort here to ensure that, continued use of your property, if you've lived there for an extended amount of time, you can keep using your property how you were. If you go to redevelop or expand or add something new, just like any other code, things get changed over time and you'll have to go through that process. But yeah, that's accurate.
Great, thanks. Thank
Yeah,
you.
there were some interpretations of the language that were making, like, you can't fertilize my lawns was a way to interpret it. So we fix that so that people can still take care of their yards.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And
I'll
so,
move. Oh, go ahead.
oh, I just was gonna ask, so the language now related to the question about the more severe restrictions related to slope, et cetera, would be located east of SR 190
right.
and SR 210. Is that the
Yeah,
language
so
that you'll go
That's the
to?
next part.
Oh,
that's next. So this was brought up last time. We received a couple public comments
Oh,
from
I'm
some
throwing
property owners.
softballs here, Mike.
Yeah, you set me up there. I appreciate it. So the question is, there's some language right now saying, for slope areas that are not part of a larger continuous natural slope system that are less than 2 acres in size, if you go through a pretty rigorous review process, you could develop a kind of a freestanding hill that doesn't connect to any other larger slope area, or part of a mountainside and doesn't jeopardize, anyone else's property. But what we said is east of Wasatch Boulevard, that exception process does not apply. What we failed to do was categorize what Wasatch Boulevard meant for the entire length of that corridor. So what we have here is this kind of triangle area that's outlined in green, where we functionally have 2 Wasatch Boulevards. One is the state road, and then one is the city's named Wasatch Boulevard. So this was brought up a couple meetings ago. There are some property owners that live inside this triangle who were interested in recommending that the exception be allowed within the triangle area, and that the exception, that the Wasatch Boulevard we were talking about in the ordinance be better clarified to the state Wasatch Boulevard. So we did an
The
analysis
state
of,
route.
well,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think just this can be done really quickly. It's state routes, 190, 210.
Right. So I will say the original intent was to preserve the natural hillside. So I think that is the original intent by staff. But what we also said is, hey, we'll do an analysis of where the 30% slope is. What could this even have an impact on, if we do make that clarification. And this big red line that you can see here through the kind of the middle of that triangle area, that's like 22 acres. So the exception process wouldn't apply to that. That's the big ridge that Granite Oaks sits on, and then it drops down to Wasatch Boulevard to the west. So what we're really looking at are kind of these smaller dark red areas that, there's not a lot of them, these little self-contained things where, if we make the clarification that everything west of the state roads could go through that exception process, it's really not affecting a lot of that area. So this is all a long technical way to say staff isn't super concerned making that clarification for this to apply east of the state roads, and then the exceptions can apply anywhere west of that.
Great.
I would just thought it's nice that the people who lived there looked at it, read it, and was like, wait a second. Is that what you really meant? So
Sure.
we didn't get too far along before, because you say Wasatch Boulevard to me, and I just do kind of default that it's gonna be the one that goes up the canyon, even though I should know better.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Mike. And if anybody is listening and you're still awake, you're a candidate to be on the city council. Just kidding, Mike.
No, I get it.
Sleds and repairing, fun stuff. No, that was it's super interesting and anyway, sure.
I'm glad that we're moving forward with the sleds. I hope that we can get that out there, people can review it. And it's an important ordinance that really needs to be updated.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks, Mike. Don't go too far. Item E, is we want to talk about, we had a resident come to us that has requested a change to our RV parking ordinance, our current one, and so.
You won't believe the shiver that went down my spine when I read this.
So anyway, Mike, I don't know if it's you who want, or planning to talk, I think that you're gonna plan to talk about it, and then we'll have Chief Russo add in too, so.
Sure, yeah, I'll just go over quick what is in our ordinance today that applies to kind of this situation. So RV parking in front yards was kind of the issue that was raised by a resident having some interest in prohibiting RV parking in front yard areas. In chapter 11 right now, there are regulations for controlled vehicles, and an RV fits under the definition of controlled vehicles. That's, you know, large trucks, commercial vehicles, RVs, trailers, you know, things like that. So the current restrictions today are listed here in the bullet points. Basically, you can't park these on the street for more than 2 hours. They can be stored in front, side, or rear yard areas, subject to additional regulations. They have to be parked on a paved surface. There's your definition of paved surface that we talked about. If they're in the front yard area, they must be operable and legally licensed and registered if those things are applicable. They cannot overhang any portion of the right-of-way, which would include the sidewalk. They can't be stored within the side yard area on a corner lot without prior approval by the DRC. That creates intersection visibility issues. They may not be stored in violation of clear view standards. Again, they can't block intersection visibility. Commercial vehicles, this isn't RVs, but like work trucks and things like that, if they're in the front and side yards, they have to be in active use by the owner. And then a maximum of 3 controlled vehicles can be stored on any lot smaller than ½ an acre in size. As the size of the lot goes up, you're allocated, you know, additional parking. But those are the standards we have in place right now. I know code enforcement deals with this a lot, and we get a lot of calls and refer them to that ordinance. And at least from a zoning standpoint, in our experience, those standards have worked pretty well at mitigating the potential issues that this would cause. But that's my 2 cents. I'll turn it over to Chief.
And I asked her,
Yeah, we put it back up, Mike, while
Oh,
Scott.
sorry, yeah.
Question.
so 2 side by sides or 4-wheelers or jet skis on one trailer is one controlled.
Yeah, that would be
Two.
a trailer. Yeah, trailer for towing
What's a
equipment.
trailer?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Mike, why would the controlled vehicles cannot be stored within the side yard setback area on corner lots? Why would we say without prior approval by the DRC?
I think there are certain circumstances where that could work, you know, where you have a large corner side, but some corner sides are a little smaller and it could block intersection visibility. So it's just an added layer to say, hey, just, you know, run that by the city before you do it.
Right, if you get a full-size
I
RV,
think
that makes
that since this was one of my constituents who brought this forward, and I really appreciate that the mayor and others supported having a council discussion on this. And I think the concern is that corner lots, in essence, they have 2 front yards
some respects,
Okay.
yes.
because they front onto 2 places. So the neighbors, so even though the address, let's just use an example. So the address is on Kings Hill Drive. However, in essence, they have another front yard that faces onto Sapphire. I'll just make this up. So the folks that live on Kings Hill across the street will say, oh yeah, I don't want RVs. I don't want to stare at their RVs parked, where I have to look at them. But the all the neighbors that are across on the corner lots that are on Sapphire, then they park a big RV there, within the setback of whatever it is, 15 feet from the curb. And all these neighbors, instead of looking at a yard or trees or something, are looking at a big RV. So I don't, help me to understand where this language addresses, what are you calling a side yard? To me, a corner house doesn't really have they have 2 backyards and 2 front yards, you could say. Is this making any sense?
Yeah, so corner side yards and corner front yards are different. They have different setback standards. So one is defined as the front yard and one would be defined as the corner side. And then if according to the code, if an RV is parked in the corner side, they're supposed to come get DRC approval. So we review that. I would say the DRC would probably be reviewing that for safety and visibility rather than any sort of aesthetic or look perspective. And I will also say in my time at the city, the DRC's never looked at any request for an RV parking in the corner side.
I know one brought home a really big boat and it was parked. And it was taller than the fence and it caused some concern just because it was visible, but it did. And it was, yeah, corner lots. I understand exactly what you're saying. It was one of my concerns because now all of a sudden I live, well, it's not all of a sudden, I knew it was coming. I live on a corner lot now. I didn't used to, I didn't for a long time, but they are treated a little bit differently. And a lot of it has to do with the, you know, those sight lines. I think if the sight lines can be preserved, then they should be given the benefit of the doubt, but,
So is this
I mean,
constituents
but it could
focus
also
kind of
be-
more nuisance?
Well, yeah, they
Visual nuisance,
consider
I mean,
it, I think they consider it, frankly, an eyesore.
Yeah,
And we're seeing this more and more where residents want to put a pad in because they have a
Something.
corner lot and they're storing their RV. I've seen this in other neighborhoods. This is becoming more prevalent. To me, this is something that could be well addressed with form-based code, which does take into consider aesthetics. You know, I'm trying to remember, I think the resident wanted some kind of a very, oh gosh, was it a variable or a variance, thank you, a variance.
I actually have the original email.
Would you mind reading that intent of, because I don't know if this is really addressing the intent that the resident was looking for.
Yeah, so the resident said, I'd like to propose our city revise current policy and prohibit any long-term parking storage of controlled vehicles within the front setbacks of residential zones, or that such action require permission which is granted via a variance process. That
Okay,
was the
so-
request.
say that again. Anything in the front yard?
Yes, that's what the email says. Propose that policy prohibit any long-term parking storage of controlled vehicles within the front setbacks of residential zones.
So,
I wonder if we could get clarification.
yeah, Tim, can you help me then on this, on this bullet point that says controlled vehicles will not be stored within the side yard setback area on corner lots without prior approval by the city's DRC. So, but again, my understanding is that this resident is considering that in essence, it's two front yards. There really isn't a side yard, so.
Yeah, on the side yard, like Mike has indicated, it has to go to DRC to not necessarily because of the aesthetics, but to protect the site visibility of intersections. I mean, that's primarily what it talks about here. What they're proposing is, I think, more of an aesthetic issue where we don't have them in front setback areas, that they have to be located most likely at the rear setback or potentially side yard area. So that's what they're proposing. And that's what we need direction on. And Chief Russo, I know you probably have some insight from a code enforcement perspective.
Well, obviously, we have, RVs and these pads all over the city. This isn't one or two. There are several on corner lots. I think you have to be extra careful when you start passing more restrictive ordinances for people's private property use, wherein it doesn't violate any safety or fire hazards or vision issues. And that's not what we're talking about here, because current ordinance is sufficient and it keeps them off the sidewalk. And as long as there's a clear sight line for traffic, and which is what they're talking about in their side yards, if you get that approval, then it's not a problem. People should have a right to do that, and they're lawfully registered vehicles and they're on a solid surface, so we don't have things getting into the soils. And it's actually, I don't recall that it's ever been an issue in 15 years here, that we've had people in compliance with this, that we've had a complaint. It's where they park over a sidewalk or something like that.
or on the grass, or their junk cars, and it's kind of a
Right.
junkyard.
And that is currently enforceable. So it's not broken.
Interesting.
So what we, related to this, we would need direction. We haven't done a lot of research on it. We're proposing what the ordinance is. It was brought forward by a resident and for council consideration, and we would need one of two things. One, direction to, if you want us to move forward with changes, give us that direction with the majority of the council, or two, if there's not a majority, we'll leave it as status quo, and that's what we need direction on.
I would say that we have pigeons was a wonderful year-long discussion. Snakes was another that we dealt with for a good long time, and you may be surprised, but this RV unit was number 3 or 4 on that list that we spent a lot of time going through. If it seems that it has been working, I would, we did spend a lot of time. I'm not saying that we can't review anything that we've ever done. We did spend a lot of time on it. I would probably tend to agree if code enforcement and restricting out of front yards, I think would be a little bit of overreach myself. I would agree with
I like
the chief.
They have to be operable and licensed.
Exactly.
Registered.
And
So
that,
it can't
those are
just be
those
an
things
old
we,
one that they just sit there forever.
it can't be on the cinder blocks for your
Yeah.
trailer or that type of a thing.
Okay, well, we'll move on and without any direction to change it yet. So if, we can continue to talk if we'd like as a council. So. Okay, item F. Kavachi annexation petition. So we'll have our city manager, Tim Pingy, and our city attorney, Shane Toppin, talk about what is being requested. So we have an official petition.
Yeah, we do, and Mike Johnson prepared a memo that kind of outlines the background. There was a time that we have received just recently made, and we included that in the information you have, a notice of intent for annexation. I was contacted by the county where they received that and forwarded that on. This property used to be in the city clear back in 2004, and they requested annexation out of the city at that time. And that is what occurred. There was approval through approval of the property for development, which included 43 lots. And those are currently under construction. There are 24 that have been completed right now. And then, excuse me, there's 43 lots, 24 are unbuilt, and there's 3 in process. So of the properties, there's 43 approved, and then there's 24 lots left to be developed with 3 in process. So anyway, though, that's kind of what we've received thus far. We haven't had a lot of conversations about this. We haven't received the petition yet, but it's going to be coming. We wanted to get this on your radar. Some of the issues of concern that we outlined in the letter, basically just that we need to have clarity on is what it would mean if we did annex this into the city and we had 24 lots to be approved through the building permit process, what that would mean with the existing county code versus what we have, especially in our sensitive lands, because this area is in sensitive lands. There's a pretty major, if you've been up there, access road to the site, which is a private access road. Oftentimes when there is extensive, not even now, but in the future, extensive maintenance that needs to occur on that, we sometimes get requests for taking those over. That's not something we're saying is a request, but something we have to consider. And then emergency services, a secondary access is that there's options for that, but nothing formal at this point. So those are 3 considerations we would have to look at. We did look at the currently what with the current build properties, what the tax revenue would be for the city. It's roughly in the 53,000 range right now with the current built. But obviously there's a number that are not built from what our research shows. And so those are just some of the things that we have to consider. Once again, we wanted to put this on your radar. Shane, if you have any additional input, or Mike Johnson or any others. Once again, this was in the city and then it was annexed out.
What was their reasoning to annex out at the time? Do you
We
remember?
didn't give them what they wanted. I'll say they.
Yeah,
This was a time back.
sure.
It was, anyway, he wanted to do 800 units, some mixed use ski resort type thing on top there, asked for it. We wouldn't give it to him. blah, 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 blah. Well, he was on the side, so he says, well, I'll de-annex and I'll go ask the county. We went and asked the county, mayor showed up and said, it's still a crazy idea, don't give it to him, and they didn't give it.
Okay.
Do they list a reason for their intent to do this?
I guess we haven't
On an
received it yet, right?
application.
So you don't.
We have received.
Oh, we have.
We,
Sorry.
we received a notice of intent for annexation. We don't have any of the details on what their rationale is at this.
Mine would be if they're gonna go with those 24 lots and ask for another 200 units of condos up there, it's still gonna be no. But if it's, there wasn't ever, I don't recall a significant issue with being developed the way that it was approved. This would, I mean, this one's old enough, it went to the community council before corporation. That road, and that would be a main concern. So it would have to be very, very clear that it's the development's issue, and it will continue to be that. I know the original application for that road had 75 variances to the county. They reduced that down to less than 24. But it was quite the engineering feat, but I would hate to take responsibility. And I would hope that the owner and developers would be, and HOA would be very aware that that would be a strong stance that I would have.
So tell me what we're looking for. So tell me what the process would be. So they would submit a formal application, which they haven't done.
Yeah, they filed the annexation process starts with the filing of a notice of intent. It goes to Salt Lake County, who sends out notices to the certain entities. And once those notices go out, then it comes back to us. The applicant can ask us to supply them with a form for their annexation petition. And so I think that that's probably where we are right now. I don't know that we've received that request after we received the certification from Salt Lake County that they sent out the required notice, it's called. So once they get the annexation petition, well, then they have to go out and gather signatures. It has to be, I think, majority of the land area and at least 1/3 of the assessed value of the private property in the annexation area. And then they submit their petition. And then the city council has the chance to decide whether or not to even process that petition. And so if the city council denies further processing, then it's done. If the city council doesn't speak to it or allows it to go ahead, well, then the city recorder and I get together and review the petition to make sure the signatures are compliant and all other aspects of the signature process are compliant. And then it's just a very long process. There are 2 points though that the city council can say yes or no. The first is a provisional one, further processing, and then at the back end, if it gets that far, the city council can again say yes or no. We are not required to accept an annexation. I would concur with what Scott said. He was about the only ones around the table that were here back then. We went through a de-annexation process with these folks and initially fought it and then just decided that it wasn't worth it. And so now they're back again. I myself would be very worried about that road, even though the current people annexing may think it's not a problem. Someday that road is going to break down and there are going to be people here asking the city to take over that roadway because why should they have to pay property taxes to pay for roadways when their own access road, they're having to pay for that as well. So anyway, that's what I have to say about it. But we're at the front end of the process, and I think that's the reason for discussing this.
So we told you when we received this that we would bring it into a work session, make you aware of this, and now we're just waiting on additional information, which we will continue to keep you informed on if we get the petition and go to that point.
Yeah, I think anxious to hear what their plans are, and I was just asking Sean if it's in, his district. It's going to impact.
It would be in District 4, I'm pretty quite sure, because I have the whole easterly corridor along the eastern side of our city.
Okay,
Right, Tim?
Yeah,
This is-
we'd have to look at it with.
because you're
I know,
that.
but I go all the way
Yeah.
to the gravel pit stuff.
Well,
I'm just saying.
I think from a geographic perspective, yes, we would have to, if the annexation occurred, there's some requirements on population per district. We'd have to make sure there's the equal
Yeah.
distribution that we have to
40
look
homes
at.
probably wouldn't.
I think my point is whoever represents it, I am anxious to hear what the people around that area, I mean, it's gonna impact my
If we get a
district probably the
break-
least. And so I'd be relying upon those that represent it and what those neighbors think. So,
Well, I have a few initial thoughts at first blush, and I will say that there has been the constituents, I don't live personally up in that northerly section, but those that live in the Prospector area, there's been some negative sentiments toward Tabachi. However, I don't think that emotional sentiment is what rules the day for me. Some of the concerns I have is that this could become an inordinate amount of time on our staff to work through what could be very, sounds like rather tedious if there was at one time 75 variances being requested. I also think that the current tax revenue of 54,000 a year is very small. We know that these larger lots bring in proportionally very small amounts of tax revenue, and $54,000. I'm not saying that when everything's complete, it'll be that small, but that's a drop in the bucket when we have our public works department having to possibly get involved in mitigating roadways if it comes to that, if the residents there start demanding that, and concerns about our emergency services personnel, like police and fire. I think it could be a consideration to look at a PID, kind of public improvement district for that area, and impose as best we can project fees for the residents that live there to cover what could become severe O&M and other liabilities.
Any other questions, comments?
I guess, just emphasizing what I heard Councilwoman Burrell say. In this process, I think that the council would be certainly entitled to conduct a feasibility study of how this all works out, the cost and the benefit of, at least in terms of dollars of bringing in this piece, $54,000 when it sounds like it's about $40,000 billed out. I don't know if that's a net number, if that takes into account the cost of snow plowing and everything else that would have to occur up there. So anyway,
The roads up there are all private.
Yeah, I was gonna say, aren't they privately?
I don't know.
Those are details we'd have, yeah,
I don't
when you
know.
said that.
I don't know what they're asking for, frankly.
Well, we are getting pressure from residents who live along these private roads for the city
Exactly.
to take them over, and we're getting a lot of pressure in that way. So I think this is a very reasonable, I think a feasibility study would be called for.
Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate that update. So that's the end of our staff reports. There's only item 4 is a review of calendars and upcoming event, and the only one listed is our July 27th through 29th Cottonwood Hill Heights Butlerville Days that we're all excited about. Volunteers and sponsors needed. For more information, contact Ann Etchell. You can go to butlervilledays.com to do so. We do not have anything to discuss in a closed meeting, so at this point, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn our work session.
motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn in a second. All in favor, say aye.
I,
Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you.
36 minutes.
For 36 minutes.
Well,
Sorry, some direction.
So I helped take care of it for the last 21
Here's the.
Yeah, we're doing a big celebration. Little football stadium. He never missed. You get that, okay? The fall of 1956. He never missed a single football game at Highland High, not just at, but away and home
Since 56.
from 1956 to 2023. This year.
That's like.
And he taught at Highland from 1956 until.